So guys, we have Naya Sagi here. Naya, as I was saying, is a prolific entrepreneur, law graduate, interestingly, with an MBA from Harvard Business School. Also a scholar from, you had the J.N. Tata scholarship, right, Naya?
That's right.
And doing lots of great work here in through Baby Chakra and now the Goodlands Group. So we're going to hear all about her journey, both pre and post Harvard. Feel free to ask questions, guys, in the chat. I like to make the sessions interactive. And as I said, you're going to get a dose of inspiration today from Naya, and also a dose of reality, on what it takes to get into these top tier schools and what it takes to really become successful after school, because school, as we know, is just a milestone and the rest of our journey of life. So Naya, without much ado, let's jump right into this. So tell me about your life. Let's start with your childhood. What kind of child were you? Were you a naughty kid? Were you serious? Were you nerdy, academic, boisterous? What were you like?
So first of all, Vibha, it just feels so fun just to be talking to you because I'm so fond of you, as you know. And, I think you've done such amazing work with, I think, the entire sort of Harvard alumni network in India. So it's really like a privilege and it's really fun to be talking to you. So I will probably be grinning to this entire conversation.
Very great.
Question. I mean, I think, I've shared this a few times now on a few public forums. I was actually a very naughty child. I was very stubborn, very, a child who was really bad academically, actually. So, I refused to give plus 2 accounts exam, like the class 12 accounts exam, which was the ISC, because I just refused to do it. I didn't want to do it. And I remember my mom banging at the door. I kind of locked the door from inside in my bedroom and I was like, I'm not going for it. So even today, my ISC report card actually has accounts NA, So wow. I think I was a really bad. So I think if anything, my story should give people hope that it doesn't matter what happens. I think life has interesting ways of evolving and for you to find your career path and to find your passion. So yeah, I think that was really my story.
Okay, so you weren't very academic. You didn't want to take the exams. Then what happens? How does law school happen? If you started there, how did you transition to law school?
It was, I think, I do believe a lot in serendipity. And I think what ended up happening was because my high school marks were not great. Obviously, I couldn't apply to like the Stevens and to like the top like Sri Ram schools, etc. of the world, right? So I basically could only apply where we had entrance examinations and they had a basic cut of like 60-65%, which obviously I'd met. So I applied to National Law School in Bangalore and I gave at that point in time, like the national, the law exam.
The law
and
exam.
I made it, and I think I actually came, 4th or 6th all over India, which is pretty crazy for my mom and me. We were like, okay, what just happened? And I think, what I really learned in that journey, Vibha, was, I think, 2 things, right? One is that law school was actually this real hotspot of people who were really ambitious and really driven and very, very passionate about, at that point in time, the law, whatever they were doing, right? Could be even drama or football or debating or mooting or whatever it was, right? But very, very passionate people, very focused on excellence. I derive, and what I've learned about myself is I derive a lot of energy from my peers, right? And I think NLS had this amazing set of peers that I just learned a lot from. I think the second thing about law gave me was this very clear sort of approach to problem solving, right? Because in law, like there is, while of course you look at precedents and you look at case laws, etc. But I think for the most part, what you realize is that there is no right answer, right? It's about how you can back every answer you approach or every route you approach with logic, with facts, with as many precedents as possible, right? Comps as possible, but there is no right answer. So I think those 2 things I really took away from law school. And I think they still are really very valuable life lessons for me today.
Okay. So this competitive peer set, that's also ambitious. And that, I think, really set the tone for driving your ambition as well. So you went not just to Harvard, but to also a super competitive undergraduate program. So this seed for ambition and drive gets germinated at quite a young age. Why law? But what was the thought process? As all the young people on this would be watching, how did you end up picking such a specialized field and then transitioning to something that's obviously quite far away from law? So was there a deeper thought process, or was it on a whim?
No, it wasn't on a like I'd mentioned, I think one was, of course, the whole piece about there being an entrance examination and, that being an amazing program to be part of, if I could make it to the entrance examination, right? So, but I mean, the thought in applying for law school was, having grown up in Calcutta and just my parents themselves, right? We've been told that, you have one life, make it a life of impact, right? I mean, build something meaningful, impact people's lives, do good, right? I felt like law was a very, very powerful force and is a very powerful force for change and for impact. So actually at National Law School, there were two things again I did there. One was I really discovered my a lot of love and a lot of passion for international humanitarian law and human rights. So literally every internship I did, every like moot court I did, and every like paper I wrote and publication I was part of was all on like international humanitarian law and human rights. I think the second thing I loved about law school was, while I was building out impact, for like a broader ecosystem and like trying to like talk about that and, get engaged in that. I also learned, I was actually elected student body president. And I was, I think, the fourth or the fifth woman in the history of law school to be elected student body president. And I really wanted to, build impact in my community, like in the community I was part of. Right. So yes, I think, and that like I understood that, as a leader, you actually have a responsibility beyond yourself. Right. So I think the whole sort of journey of being president of the student body when you're up at 3 a.m. because, there's a student who's junior who's basically going through a life crisis, an exam the next day, or another like peer maybe has lost a parent, right? And you are with them. Or, someone's basically honestly gotten drunk and is like making a ruckus on campus. So you're pretty much running and trying to solve that situation.
So you get into leadership and problem solving as well.
Exactly. And a deep passion for
Okay. And then what happens after? Where do you end up going after law school?
I actually had an offer with a law firm in London, a Magic Circle law firm called Clifford Chance in London, which is one of the best law firms there is globally. And I was quite set, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to London, live a really fancy life there. And then McKinsey came to campus. I'd never heard of McKinsey before. And, they talked about all the work they were doing with governments, with foundations, and with the private sector and healthcare. And I found it really interesting because, the law is a lot about like, finding problems, while it sounded like management consulting was about solving problems. So I think that caught my eye. So basically I deferred my Clifford Chance offer and I joined McKinsey India for about, I thought, a year. And then I stayed on for about 2.5, 3 years. So that journey happened as a manager.
Wow. Okay. I have a comment here from Arya saying, not going to lie, you're kind of inspiring me to skip my 12th grade exams. Arya, she also mentioned she ranked 3rd or 4th in the law entrance exams, and that's how she got into National Law School. So if the 12th grade doesn't matter and you're taking your SATs right now, and that's what's going to matter, make sure whatever entrance test matters, at least nail that, and then you can get your admit, secure it, and then sleep over your final IBs. But please don't take that away from Naya. I'm pretty sure that's not what she was intending to say. Okay, you end up in McKinsey. From law, how was that shift? How was it going from a law school to a consulting firm? Were there other people from law school as well at McKinsey? And let's talk a little bit about that phase of your life.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think this was the second year that McKinsey was hiring from National Law School in Bangalore. So there weren't too many lawyers actually in McKinsey India. And I remember my first, the deck, you call it the PPTs that you make for clients in McKinsey, you call them a deck. I remember my deck had footnotes on them, right? So basically, like, I think I was, so it was a very, like, I think a fun transition from like really being very precedent obsessed and oriented to basically saying, you know what, let's do some guesstimates on numbers and let's do some comps, which are like guesstimates for the most part, right? So I think that entire shift in thinking from saying that genuinely, like, while don't just rely on what has already happened, let's kind of create what could happen. I think that's the big shift in business thinking that you get, right? And I think that's what taught me. Yeah, so I think McKinsey was fab. Yeah, I mean, I work with a bunch of amazing teams who I'm still very close to today. A lot of them have actually gone on to become amazing entrepreneurs themselves. And work with a bunch of amazing clients, right from, 108, the ambulance service that we scaled from Hyderabad at that point in time to about 10 states in India. I had the privilege of working with Abdul Kalam, very closely in scaling that out. Then work with the government and building now their ITES infrastructure, work with the Gates Foundation on maternal and child health scale up strategies across India. So like a bunch of very varied projects, and from a very oriented thought, right? So it was a beautiful experience.
Okay, so from a very young age, at the age of 22, 23, you got exposed to very large scale projects, work with some of the brightest brains. And I think that probably set the tone for wanting to do something at scale and impactful.
Absolutely. And I think, the big realization, Vibha, because, when you're 20 to 23, and I really respect that about McKinsey, and I want that to be the same culture in my teams today, right? One is that there is really no hierarchy. In McKinsey, the right answer could come from anyone, right? And as a business analyst, imagine a fresher out of law school, right? Or fresher in general, to have that power to know that, you could be talking about what seems to be the right answer and you'd heard, right? And your argument would be given the same merit as someone else's argument was extremely empowering. I think the second piece is working with CEOs at a very early stage, right? You're sitting in a boardroom and you're presenting to CEOs and you realize they're human. So I think a lot of that, that hierarchical thinking that, we grew up with in schools, etc., that went away with McKinsey.
Fantastic. Okay. I love this. So the law school's given you a very strong foundation, and then McKinsey takes that foundation and gives you so much real world practical exposure. Okay, great. Awesome. I have a question here from the audience from Varsha, who's asking, at what point did you decide on Harvard and why?
It's so interesting. In my first year in law school, I actually sat, at my in my hostel room, and I said, where do I want to go in life? Like, what is my dream? And I put up a post in front of my desk, right? We have the small little desks in law school, right, in our dorms. And I wrote Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. I still remember that. And I lost that paper a couple of years back, but I had it till I went to Harvard. And I didn't realize I'd go to Harvard Business School. I knew I wanted to go to Harvard, right? And I think the reason for that was, and what I really saw play out as well, and Vibha, you'd be able to relate so beautifully as well. I want to be part of something that is just so much, like, it's just such a microcosm of excellence. Imagine being in a place where you have the business school, you have the ed school, education school, you have the Harvard School of Public Health, you have the Harvard School of Design, you have the Harvard
law school,
the Kennedy School, the law school. It's insane, right? So you're basically part, and that's what I did, just sort of circumventing a few questions, but that's really what I did at Harvard. I think at business school, while of course I was doing my classes, like my first year, my second year at business school, right? But I literally was sitting in on classes across campus. I was going to Kennedy School.
I want to hear that story. So you scribbled this down in your first year at law school.
Yeah.
Okay. But what was the thought? Like, on what basis did you write Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge? And why did you pick these three schools? I'm very curious. I'm in the middle of college selection right now. So what was the basis of this college selection?
Honestly, it wasn't for anything else. I mean, I didn't honestly think about like career and everything else. I just literally said, like, where can I get the most amazing experience? And, I think at law school, I started enjoying, for the first time in my life, academics. Right? I learned what it was to basically be in a place where there was a case study method where you could learn through stories and through storytelling in some sense. You could learn through arguments and, a lot of conflict at some level with peers, right? And that was amazing. I think it was very eye-opening a way of learning. And so I think what for me stood out was that, actually I love academics. I love learning. It was interesting. It was a bit of a shift in perspective for me. And therefore, where do I want to go next? So then I said, okay, what are the best places academically in the world? And I said, okay, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, because that's what you know when you're like in first year undergrad, right? So that's what happened.
Awesome. So you have this sort of like, honestly, for me, it happened when I was in school. I was in the 8th grade and I saw this catalog of Harvard Summer School. And at that point I was like, okay, I've got to go to this institution at some point, I think Harvard just sort of has created this aura and just projected themselves as a center of excellence, so I don't know what it is. You just think that if you're going to go to Harvard, you're going to be surrounded by a pool of excellence.
Yeah.
And honestly, I really felt it was like that. I don't think that the brand, sort of projected one thing and then you go there and you're like, oh, this is kind of average. You go there and you're like, oh, damn. Now I understand what Harvard really is. Did you have that? Did you feel that as well?
100%. 100%. And I'm so grateful for that experience every day, right? Because, see, honestly, Vibha, McKinsey was also a center of excellence. Right?
Yeah.
It was. And McKinsey Center of Excellence professionally. And I think academically, Harvard was that center of excellence, which, you know, like literally, I mean, I think, and you know this so well, right? Simple things like classes starting on time, people partying, like everyone partying till like 2 a.m. in the morning, but everyone shows up prepared